Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We had some technical difficulties, but we had some additional people coming in and getting settled, so that it all worked out great. Welcome. We are shaking things up a bit with this session. It's not the usual, presentation session back to back. It is going to be a debate. And we want to know your opinion before the debate and after the debate, and see if your opinion was swayed by the arguments that were put forth. Stella and I will try and keep it civil up here. If we don't succeed, please help us. Things might get heated. Also, the audience might want to calm themselves at some point. So just let's work here together as a community to keep peace. My name is Philip Lahela-Walter. I'm with ICLEI Europe, and I'll hand it over here to my colleague Stella in a second. But today, you saw it maybe in the session description, we all understand that nature-based solutions can help address the climate and ecological emergencies. But with such a small window left to overcome the environmental and societal challenges brought forth by climate change, what is the best way to implement them? Do we have time to strategize, or do we need to focus our efforts on action? So we have action versus strategy today, and I'll hand it over to Stella now.
Hello. Oh, it's working. Okay. So I'm Stella. I'm from the Stella Young from the Greater London Authority. I had a whole spiel about the interactive element I had for this presentation, but that's not happening anymore. So we're just going to go old school, voting with hands. And so I guess we'll just launch right in and introduce our first debater, David Mooney from London Wildlife Trust. David has 15 years of experience in the urban nature conservation sector. He's an expert in developing partnerships across public, private, and charities sectors to transform London's open spaces for people and wildlife. David currently is responsible for developing the London Wildlife Trust's approach to strategic ecology, securing biodiversity net gain and urban greening through influencing design development and planning of large-scale regeneration projects across London and the southeast.
And in your left corner, we have Abby. Abby specializes in policy planning and strategic delivery, focusing on the intersection of cities, environment, and communities. She's head of green infrastructure at the Greater London Authority and chairs the National Suds and Water Reuse Policy Leadership Group, with prior roles at the Environment Agency, KLH, Sustainability, and in the US. Welcome. All right, shall we start with the first hand raising?
So my first jazzy question, I think, was supposed to be about just in the context of NBS and mainstreaming it. Do you think that we should focus all our energy and time on creating a long-term strategy on how to implement measures, or do you think just the urgency of the climate emergency that we should just focus on doing action now? We just do now, think later. So if we can just have a show of hands for those who think that we should focus on strategies.
You got to decide now. Oh, leave it up. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
About 10?
Yeah.
And those who think we should just move forward with action. Ah.
Oh. Keep your hands up, everyone.
Okay. And then those who just not sure, you don't know. No, it's fine. I wasn't sure if we can. Okay, but I'm glad you all committed. So let's see if that changes at the end.
All right, thanks very much. The main question we are here to discuss is, in London, what is or what should be leading the nature-based solutions movement in the context of the climate emergency. Should strategy be driving action, or does action influence good strategy development? David, we would like to start with you. Why don't you take it off?
Thank you very much. So my name is David. I work for London Wildlife Trust. The Wildlife Trust is part of a national movement of 46 wildlife trusts across the country, across the UK. We have about 1 million members. And if you remember one fact about the Wildlife Trust, we have more nature reserves and nature spaces and open, free to access nature spaces in the UK than McDonald's have restaurants. It's a pretty sad indictment of where we are, that I'm comparing myself to a global fast food chain, or our organisation to a global fast food chain, but there we are. I am less bullish now that I think I've already won the debate.
You can lose votes. So.
I thought I was kind of like a fox in the hen house here, and or the cat amongst the pigeons. I thought this was a very policy focused forum, and evidently there's some room for what I'm about to say. So the Wildlife Trust have we're among other large environmental NGOs in the UK. Have been going for over 100 years. So with the National Trust, RSPB, and a few others, the Woodland Trust, there's nearly 10 million members. So we kind of represent over half of the voting population in the UK in a bad electoral year. So for 100 years, we have been delivering action. We've been creating, nature-rich, open green spaces in spite of, irrespective of political opinion of the time, or planning or strategy. Planning as a concept in the UK is, I don't know, open for debate, but probably 60 years old. So half as long as the Wildlife Trusts have been around. So policy, as a fact, I think, has been following practice for decades. And I think it's now more important than ever that we continue that and drive that understanding that good policy can only be created if it follows and copies and replicates practice and action. And it's now more than ever, because of the ecological crisis that we're in. We have little time for the politics of compromise and the politics of policy and compromise that brings. Compromise is a word I've chosen, which was one of my slightly aggressive choices of word, particularly in this context of co-creation. But compromise with politicians and compromise with local authorities is something I have very little time for or patience for. Policy compromise and policy kind of integration is not something that works. The natural world, species and habitats are in vast decline. It is saving the natural world is the only policy that really matters as far as I'm concerned. It should be at the top of the policy list. We need a policy hierarchy. There is no policy hierarchy in London. I don't see policy hierarchy working anywhere. It's just a flat list of policies that kind of compete with each other. We need to if we're going to use policy, having built policy from practice, we need to then put it into a hierarchy with nature conservation, nature-based solutions being the number one priority for policy. If we don't do this, then we're going to be continue the bin fire of environmental legislation that currently happens in this country. And this morning, our wonderful government have also just trashed another policy that was coming into play. So that policy didn't even get into place. Biodiversity net gain. I can go on. I won't go down that tangent. So, in short, practice always has led policy, and it continues to this day. London Wildlife Trust continues to build nature reserves in really quite unique, random, post-industrial locations without permission from local authorities or from local planning or regional planning authorities. We do it in partnership with communities, with private landowners, and then local authorities jump on board when they realise that that's where the political mood is. So I think we've been doing it for over a century. That's my argument anyway.
Yeah.
What you got, Abby?
That's right.
Thanks a lot, David. I think for 100 years of action and practice, you talked a whole lot about policy just now. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what was achieved by all this practice and action in those 100 past years. But before that, I would like to hear what your counter argument is here, Abby.
Sounds good. So I head up the Green Infrastructure team at the Greater London Authority, and the GLA is the strategic authority for London over our 33 local boroughs. So, we don't manage parks or waste or any of that. The boroughs do. We are the strategic authority for London. So obviously you can see where I'm going to be coming from. And I think the thing is, there are so many brilliant projects in London, and in all the cities we've been hearing about all the last couple of days. And London Wildlife Trust has created so many fantastic projects in London. And they really are the ones that are leading the way and innovating. But mainstreaming and innovating are different things. And if we're talking about mainstreaming, we really need to consider how we embed nature-based solutions, how we scale them. Fantastic project locally is not the same as having them all around the city. We need to make sure that all of those great projects add up to something. And we have to make sure that what we do is equitable. And we need to kind of get past the kind of people and organization and places who are really passionate and leading the way on this, and get to the folks who are not, and actually make nature-based solutions part of business as usual. So that's why we need to create strategies and set strategic policy. And I would say that strategies are action also. They're action at scale, but they're not sexy. You can't cut a ribbon. You can't have a photo op with children in front of a strategy. So I get that. That's very true, but they are impactful. And I would say there's 4 key reasons why strategies matter. The first one being equity. We really need to be reaching past the usual suspects. We need to be targeting locations and places and communities that need it most, and really not just the ones that shout the loudest or who have the kind of time and money to kind of demand it from their politicians or from partners. And we all know that there's limited funding available for nature-based solutions in general, and so we need to be able to prioritize where to do that first. The second thing is the multiple benefits you can get from nature-based solutions. So we need to kind of understand what the different needs are in different places, and that will lead us to be able to better design our projects to actually meet multiple benefits, or also manage different conflicts if there's different conflicting requirements on sites. Having strategies allows us to be clear about what our goals and outcomes are, which helps us to kind of monitor what those benefits are. And it also helps us communicate why we need nature-based solutions and justify those projects. The third reason is about transferring and sharing knowledge. So we're blessed in London to have really, really strong organizations and community groups and people who know very deeply about ecology, about nature, and also really deep local knowledge, and that's really important. But quite a lot of investment and decisions happen very far from those places. They're with landowners, they're with developers and boardrooms, procurement teams, funders, people who don't care about these things. And so we need our aims and visions to be embedded in other practices so that they have to do it whether they care about it or not. And then the fourth final reason there I'll give is about being able to coordinate effectively with our partners. So funders being a massive partner there, whether that's government funding, national government funding, we issue our own grants, whether it's philanthropic partners, or if we're starting to talk about private funding and green finance, having a strategy helps communicate what we're trying to deliver and actually informs how people spend and invest that money. It allows us to coordinate across boundaries, because obviously the problems and issues that we face are not confined to municipal boundaries. You know, we think about flood risk, and some of the impacts of flooding might happen in one community, but the actual solutions might have to be done upstream in a different community, and you need to be able to coordinate that. And then I think, of course, it just creates then a pipeline of future work, and it allows you to develop the future projects that you want to do, and it also enables you to act quickly. So if funding does come up, or if opportunities do come up, then you can actually be ready to take advantage of those. So I think, when I think about strategies and strategic policy, we're thinking about delivering the big picture and just making sure that all those really great individual projects add up to something. And in London, we talk a lot about nature networks and corridors and connecting those bits of nature across a city, both for nature's sake, but for communities and to access them. But folks need to know where those places are, where those deficiencies are, to actually help us fill out that nature network. So one of the things we're working on now is developing a local nature recovery strategy that helps pull together all the bits of knowledge and existing sites, but also identify where there's more opportunities and need to fill in those gaps. And we have things like our urban greening factor, which is one of our planning policies, and something we adapted from Malmo. We were not the first on that one, but it's required across all major projects in London. And so that means with one strategic policy, projects across the city are delivering more for nature, whether or not the leaders of those projects wanted to or not. Are they always the most exemplar or innovative versions of nature-based solutions? No, not necessarily. Sometimes they are, but probably not in most cases. But it is happening at scale, and I think that's why we need strategy. We just have to do it quickly.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Abby. What really stuck out here was that sentence of strategy is actually action. So it seems like Abby is trying to co-opt here your side of the coin here. David, do you have any response to a really structured and well-prepared speech here? That's a tough one, David. Yeah. What do you think?
Should have prepared more. Look, I mean, the scaling up argument it's a really strong one. And just to be completely clear, I work with Abby on a weekly basis, so this is a slightly, kind of bit of a performance here. But I think what I'd like to try and remember here is I'm in Hamburg and I'm in a different city, and London, even though it is the centre of the universe, from my opinion, it's not. And so how can we share good practice? So what I think we do is we inspire communities. So the environmental NGO sector in London does a really important job of inspiring communities and generating community empowerment and community organising, so that when it comes to projects happening, people communities are they're already we have them at hello, they're in yes, quickly get on with it. So that's what the environment NGO sector in London does. And so when it comes to writing policy, I think the practice and the community empowerment and community organising stuff that we've done beforehand makes Abby's job a lot easier to be able to then apply policy through the London plan or through local planning. And then yes, local plans and green infrastructure strategies do help then scale up across London. So I'm not here to argue this to the death. Policy and practice are really hand in glove. They work in symbiotic kind of glory. But my point is, if it wasn't for practice and if it wasn't for community organising, policy wouldn't happen. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Whoever said that is a genius, because it's true. And I'm in the business of creating, kind of helping to create generational change, a generational movement of young people, of people from hugely diverse backgrounds, all basically saying the same thing: is get on with it, action now, make it happen now. The only thing that I kind of worry about policy and strategy is it can't change quick enough. And I think Abby basically said that it needs to happen quickly. Policy needs to adapt quickly. Strategy needs to be able to be, flexible. And with political compromise, it slows it right down. So I don't know where I'm going with that point, but I think there's another argument there somewhere.
Can I jump in about the whole appetite from the public? Let's say that people want things done, but you can't do things without money.
Yeah.
So who should be paying for the action, do you think?
I think the private sector need to be paying a hell of a lot more. And I think that's again where the NGO, the environment NGO, the third sector as you might call it, has a big role to play. We can leverage private money a lot more quickly and in a much more straightforward way than local authorities can. Private companies don't want to give money to local authorities or regional governments. They just don't. They will refuse to. We work in partnership with Abby on a project, Rewilding London, which we might talk about later. We leveraged in money from Amazon. Amazon would have never given the GLA money. They give us money though. So I think the private sector has a huge role to play in, they have all the money. It's where it's all is now. Everyone's wondering where the money is. It's in the private sector, we know that. It's all been squirreled away. Let's go and get it. We can, as an environment NGO, be the sort of attack dogs for getting that, attempt to get that money back. I don't think local authorities are in that position.
But why do you think that is? Like, why?
Why does the private sector got all the money?
No, not, well, we know why they have all the money. No, it's like, why don't they want to work if there are strategies in place, which we can roll out and make a big difference? And one of the missing pieces is finance.
Politics.
Okay, fine.
So boardrooms are like, we don't agree with that particular group who's in power at the moment, their political position, so we don't want to give them money. Or they do, and sometimes they don't. So it's the politics thing I mentioned at the beginning. That everyone's trying to compromise, and therefore private sector's just like, let's not apply our money there. Let's put it over here. So it's neutral organisation in the third sector.
I want to give Abby here the opportunity to respond, because David raised a few good points here. You talked a lot about prioritization and sharing knowledge and coordinating with partners. That sounds like a lot of time. That sounds like bureaucracy. That sounds like coordinating meetings and conferences and whatnot while the planet is burning. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's fair. But you can act quickly, and I think one of the things that are that's really important, regardless whether you're focused on kind of projects and action or strategy, is the relationships that you've built. And so I think having strong relationships, no matter what, so with partners like ENGOs, like Wildlife Trusts, and other kind of local government organizations and local community groups, you can move actually fairly quickly. And I think if you have an ongoing dialogue, you don't have to go through this very structured period of, oh, now we do consultation, and now we do this, and now we have all these meetings. Actually, you can design strategy quite quickly, and you can continue to update it along the way with those relationships and an open dialogue and understanding what the issues are, where the priorities are. And I think that's the other thing, is that in London, and I think it's the same in many cities, we do quite a lot of mapping of our cities, where the needs and the challenges are, but also where there's opportunities. And when you already have that as a foundation, you can move quickly. You're not starting from scratch every time. We're not inventing a completely new strategy every time. I mean, we do when we have a new mayor, but the policy teams don't do that. I mean, the core things are always there, and I think just to kind of go back to kind of one of the points you're making about private investment and municipalities, I think it's so true that it's harder to get private investment directly to municipality, but I think what usually wins over, whether it's private investment from corporations, but also what we're really talking about, like green finance mechanisms and those kind of more complex financial arrangements. And you have to have robust metrics and things, outcomes to get that kind of money. And it's one of the reasons I think why nature-based solutions is behind when it comes to the environmental sector and green finance, because we aren't always as robust about our metrics and KPIs. And so it's, if you have a strategy, you can focus on that and you can actually make the case for that investment, whether it's corporate or philanthropic.
Thanks a lot. David, what do you say about the point of relationships and building trust? You talked about, partnering with the private sector. Some might have an issue to getting in bed with Amazon, for example, and maybe sniff some corruption there or greenwashing. Wouldn't that call for a strategy first that ensures that there's no greenwashing taking place?
Yeah, maybe. Or we just say we need the money from the private sector, we need to take it back. It's quite a politically charged thing to say, and we can say it. We should say it. We say it to our members. We talk about it quite openly. There is greenwashing. The whole greenwashing thing it exists. It's real. But if we have good practice and good projects to fund, then we just need to take the money back from the private sector wherever it comes. Yeah, I appreciate there's probably we have a policy at London Wildlife Trust. I knew my argument was going to crumble at some point. We have a corporate partnerships policy where we do due diligence on where we take money from the private sector. So there is a limit. I just want to get on record. I realise I'm being recorded now. We do not take money from fossil fuel industry, from the arms industry, and from petrochemicals. So there is a due diligence process that happens at London Wildlife Trust, and it is called a corporate partnerships policy. But once that due diligence is done, we actually realise there's a lot of the private sector we can go in and extract funding from. I just wanted to talk about the partnership stuff with the private sector. Because of our community organising, because of our the messaging, the movement building we're doing around averting a climate disaster, an ecological crisis, and really championing and nature recovery, the private sector watches what the public want. The private sector want to extract money from the public, right? So when it comes to developers, for example, who have a huge change makers in the landscape of London or anywhere, in London, for example, developers, because of the messaging that's coming from the general public, we want more ecologically rich green space. We know that nature recovery is good for the planet and for our health and well-being. We want to be immersed and closer to nature. We want wildlife on our, from our windows. We want nature on our doorstep. The private sector responds like, oh, if you want that, then yes, we will produce it. We will build that. London Wildlife Trust, how do we build that? How do we work in partnership with you to build ecologically rich landscapes across London? So it's that influence from the general public and our community organising that we've been doing for the last 100 years that has influenced the private sector. So they're responding with what they see as a mutual set of objectives. Ecologically rich landscape, more people want to buy into it. We go down a housing, I can sense we're going to go into a housing debate here, because there's big benefit to influencing the private sector, particularly developers, to build ecologically rich green space as long as the housing mix is right. Because I can sense the question from the audience. Well, if you just make nature-based solutions a private commodity or something you can purchase, then you can exclude loads of people. If you get the housing mix right, you don't. But I asked myself and answered a question there. Sorry. I'm going to go into my own debate here.
Stand up.
I just need to stand up.
Right on, being proactive here.
Sorry.
Good, David. But yes, I would like to encourage everyone, please remember your questions. We will come to the question and answer session in a moment. and we want to not take off the heat here from our debaters until then. But Abby, what do you respond to that argument that we don't need a whole lot of more strategies and policies to approach developers and convince them about the benefits of nature-based solutions, of biodiversity, and have them change their local management plans for their private land tomorrow?
There are many enlightened developers and those, but not enough. So we do need them because they won't do it. They won't do it unless they're required to. It is a big shame that our UK government, in fine form, delayed the biodiversity net gain requirements that were going to come into the UK this morning, which is fantastic. But we need those sorts of things because the leaders will do it. The leaders will innovate. But the laggards won't. They need to be forced into it, and they need that through policy or by being incentivized through strategy and funding. And I think, in London, it's somewhat unique compared to other places, but in London we have what we call green belts, which are protected lands kind of on the outskirts of cities. And it's quite a strong protection and designation in the UK. But there's a massive debate going on right now about whether we should actually be relaxing those protections to create more affordable housing. Since you want to invite the housing debate, but there's potentially a valid argument to be had about how quite a lot of what we call greenbelt is not actually ecologically rich land; it's actually kind of wasteland, and so there is a debate to be had about how you most efficiently, effectively use that land to be equitable and to be inclusive. But you can't really do that on a site-by-site basis. You have to think about that at a strategic and policy level. Otherwise, what happens, we call it in London, you nibble away at all that green space. You let one site go because it wasn't a terribly good shape, and yes, there's some good housing on it. You let it go, but you kind of do it one at a time over time, and suddenly you've lost 15% of your green belt, and you can't recover it at all. And so you're just losing that land. And so you really do need a strategy and policies deciding how you prioritize housing versus green space and how you're going to use that land. Otherwise, developers will just take advantage of it because that's where they will follow the money. And so you need that regulation policy to direct where that goes.
That was a really good keyword, the nibbling away. I love that expression. And we'll just throw it to David. So David, thinking about John, I guess that's a common term name over there in London. I'm from Germany. Okay. So John decides, I want to do something for biodiversity, and he plants a bunch of nice flowers in his garden, and then Erna does the same in her garden, but they could come together and form an association and motivate a whole bunch of other people coming together and building a bigger movement that is built on some sort of strategy. So what do you think about that nibbling away versus having a joint idea and a joint vision, and then eventually a joint strategy in order to get bigger things done than what you would get done with smaller projects?
I mean, I think the word you used there, eventually, strategy. Yeah, I agree. Comes after. I mean, on the greenbelt, I just want to mic drop it now. On the greenbelt, it's really interesting. I think that policy is failing the greenbelt. We have a mayor who politically is on the right side of history, absolutely. He said some really random, not particularly well thought out and lack of understanding practice statements about the greenbelt. Thou shalt not build on the greenbelt is basically what he said. No building on the greenbelt under my watch. And yeah, as a holding statement that works, but what I think is going to happen, this is my forecast, if I've got anything to do with it, I'm going to make it happen, is the greenbelt. There's lots of opportunity to rewild the greenbelt, and I'm just trying to weave that word into this because it's the topic of the session somehow. We need to rewild vast sections of our greenbelt. So it's this big band of greenbelt around London. But also accept that over the years, nibbling has already happened in the form of really bad land management of that greenbelt, of sections of that greenbelt. Probably about 15%, maybe 20% of the greenbelt isn't green. It's tarmacked over to store scaffolding poles or temporary storage for fireplaces, reclamation yards. These places are in the greenbelt, massive horse and donkey paddocks in the greenbelt. It's completely non-green at all. There's no value ecologically to a good 15% of the greenbelt. So what I want to do is identify some really key landscape scale projects and programs in the greenbelt that we can rewild that can be funded by allowing, through good strategy and good policy thinking, some of that greenbelt to be that's already gone, that's already been wasted, to be built on, to pay for vast swathes of the rest of the greenbelt to be genuinely ecologically rich and brought back for nature and for people to access. So that's where practice and policy can work hand in glove at the same time. We're going to do the rewilding work. What we really need is the GLA and local authorities to just come up with a solution to unblock the green belt kind of freeze that's currently. No one wants to talk about the green belt. No one wants to build on it. No one wants to touch it and talk about it. Leave that as it is. But it's wasting away as it is. So we need practice and policy to work together. I think there's an opportunity to work at the same time.
Okay, I'll come back. So yeah, well, we are.
That's a fig leaf. That's a fig leaf there.
We are. I was going to say, well, we are actually working on a project to do some rewilding in the greenbelt, but I think in the context of, so we had a task force recently that informed the mayor about kind of how to do urban rewilding in London, and we can answer more questions about that in the questions if you want to hear about that. But they set out locations across essentially the greenbelt where we think we can do rewilding. But we're also talking to our partners who care about forestry and woodlands, and we've identified woodland opportunity areas for woodland creation. But we're also talking with food growing communities, and they're identifying sites for opportunities for food growing in the greenbelt. And that's just within the nature-based solution sector. Then you've also got folks who are looking at where it'd be good to put solar farms to help us meet net zero and all these other kind of very good environmental requirements. And so if everybody just went out and tried to put out their key pilot and big projects, they're essentially going to be competing for some of the same space because we're looking at the same requirements. So a big part of what we're doing this year is actually trying to set a bit of a spatial strategy to make sure that where we're trying to target woodland creation and where we're targeting rewilding and food growing, that either when they're overlapped, that either we're designing them to be able to meet multiple of those aims, or we're managing if they can't be done in the same place, we're actually managing that conflict and seeing where it's better to put the forest versus the rewilding projects and things like that. So yeah, but I think we still have to be acting too. So that's how we are using our strategic kind of overview to make sure we can get the best out of all of that.
Yeah, thanks. So fig leaves don't really fit into the concept of this session. So let's leave those out for now. I would like to keep the heat on you a little bit because focusing on another kind of action, which is political action. You have people standing up and saying, basically, you did all these strategies, all these policies. First of all, you're way too slow to get them done. And then you're not enforcing them or actually being successful in reaching the goals that are written into these policies. So don't you need local action? Don't you need people that stand up and be vocal about, put pressure on politicians, put pressure on decision makers, on the administration in general, to actually get things done? And then you actually implement those strategies.
You do. I mean, and I think the points Dave was making before about the way we follow public opinion and things like that, that's actually really strong. I don't know how it is in other countries, but in the UK, the media follows public opinion, and the media is very strong in influencing what our politicians say and do, for right or wrong. So you do need that public pressure and demands, but I think you also need to think about who has the loudest voice when it comes to that. Who's organized enough to make statements from a very public perspective, but also who's in the private dinner rooms with the politicians making comments and things. We were quite lucky that part of why our mayor's interested in rewilding was because there's a key stakeholder, very high-level stakeholder, brother of an MP kind of thing, who came in and told him, I think it was on the sidelines at COP, about rewilding, and that's how we became more interested in rewilding. So that happens. But you can have people influencing other directions, because the people who are in those rooms tend to be, people with money, and it's not necessarily the right, they're not necessarily always going to influence in support of these sorts of things. So you do need that public pressure, you do need that accountability and the pushing and the demands, but you also need to be able to have a baseline so you don't just get swayed by demands.
Thanks. Stella, I would be inclined to engage our audience now a little bit, but before that, do you have any questions that you want to follow up on?
Yes, sorry. We talked a lot about action, right? But I would be curious to know, so we know we want more funding from the private sector, and we have a lot of voices on the ground from the public. But who should actually bear the responsibility of the doing bit? So we've got the noise, and we've got the money. Who's in the middle to connect? Who should be?
Charity sector. Environmental NGOs. We should have more power and influence and money.
Charity sector isn't accountable, and I will say, so London Wildlife Trust is good on this, so I can say this without hurting David's feelings, because actually London Wildlife Trust is leading in this space. But the environmental NGO sector in general, certainly in the UK, also in the US, I think, is what we say in the UK, a white middle class thing. And it is, and I know there's recent controversy in the US about the Audubon Society and kind of when they were trying to open up to black birders and things like that. So the environmental charity sector is necessary and does such great work, but quite a lot of them are accountable to quite a narrow set of people, and we can't just follow what that set of people wants. Whereas public sector, and I won't say that public sector should be responsible for all of it, because we can't be, but we are accountable to the communities that we serve. So there is a check and balance, and there's a responsibility in a sense to serve even those who don't vote for a politician or don't kind of, follow these issues.
As a white male working for...
Male, pale and stale. Charity, so white. So white. We need to change that. I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, it's so true. But still, we change the charity sector from within, and we'll make my point even more valid, I think.
A good strategy to do that.
Yeah. we do have one.
Well, like I said, Wildlife Trust is doing a good job on it, because you're strategizing for it,
Yeah, I'm I regularly, make public announcements, statements, social media. I'll stand up on stages, and there won't be a time when I don't say, I absolutely know my position of power and privilege as a white middle-class man. It is my responsibility, is incumbent on me to be a good ally and try and change the charity sector, particularly the environmental NGO sector, from being almost the bottom of the barrel in terms of representation. We have the kind of embarrassing title of only being slightly less diverse than the farming community. Like we're second from bottom of the table in terms of the environmental NGO charity sector, and I'm here to change that. And I am in a position of power and privilege to do that and say that, and many times as I possibly need to. And I'm certainly going to be after lunch going into the Is MBS Just session. That's one of the main reasons why I'm here.
With these humbling words, let's continue Grillam. I want to hear your questions, and don't hesitate to ask poignant ones, controversial ones. What came up? Helen.
Okay, hi everyone. Hi everyone, Helen Nilsson from the city of Malmö. Malmö's slightly smaller than London, but we also have a lot of green spaces around our city, and Malmö has made a commitment to not build on the farmland around the city. We've made a commitment to densify our city, to build inwards, to build on the brown spaces in our city instead of the farmland, which is classed as class 10, which is the best farmland in Europe. So I'm wondering, is there strategies, policies, but we're talking about the green belt and protecting the green belt. I don't know how much of it is existing farmland. You were talking about it as wasteland, but I'd imagine it's got quite a lot of value as farmland and as for biodiversity. But I'm thinking, is there some sort of policy in London to densify the city, to build on brown spaces in the city, and also to create affordable housing within the city? Because there is a huge disparity and a lot of empty properties in London.
So yes, so we have quite strong protection requirements on the greenbelt, so you can't build there. The quality of the greenbelt is mixed, so there is some agricultural that's functional, but probably not as high quality as it could be. But yeah, so and then there is a requirement to densify and to build. We've got housing targets for affordable housing. So all that exists, but we have other drivers that mean that we don't necessarily build as much housing as we can. Yeah, mostly kind of financial drivers, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we think it's the wrong policy. We view London like an onion, just as you do in Malmö. We think you should view it like green fingers. Go out. If you densify urban centre, you disconnect people, the vast majority of the population, even further from the natural world. If you disconnect them from the natural world, they'll care even less. So we've got even less chance for nature recovery. We need to bring nature into the city, spread the city out a bit, and take nature with it. So green think. So great question. I'm glad someone asked it. This is possibly heretical. I hope there's no farmers in the room, but I do say this in front of farmers with fear of my life. We grow food in massive hydroponic sheds, huge sheds on the edge of cities, layers and layers and layers of genetically modified hydroponically grown food inside. District heating units, geothermal, solar panels, growing food, take it off the land. We've run out. The soil's dead. It's just killing it. You can try. I mean, they're looking. I know that the people are looking into it. There are trials.
I might add though that London doesn't grow much food near London. We import quite a lot, and it moves around the country. So, and London area is not the place where a lot of it is grown.
London's a specific. The agriculture value of the green belt is really, really low. We don't have any class 10 at all. It's not. There's nothing really produced in London. But I appreciate that's not a common example. It's not true. It's really quite. There are lots and lots of cities that probably do have lots and lots of agricultural value. But anyway, we can talk about sheds another time. it's something I'm really supportive of, that idea.
I do want to acknowledge that the title of this session is a little bit confusing because I think that concept of a debate between action and strategy came a bit later. But we'll touch on the rewilding again later. But let's stay with the topic strategy versus action. Are there any questions or comments here from the audience to our speakers? And then Anna.
Hi, my name is Jamie Chan. I'm coming from the Nature Conservancy in Berlin, and my question is more for Abby. And I think I'm thinking about these strategies, and they're developed maybe based on new administrations that get voted in. What about the accountability of them? Say you have policy that influences, brings in new regulation, and then sort of you have the staff that sets off to work. But what about kind of in the midterm? The administrations, they keep changing. Who is actually tracking the outcomes, and whether these new policies or these regulations are really followed upon? And is there any sort of work and any thoughts that you can share about that?
Yeah, London is unique on this, but so the way London's set up as a strategic authority, we actually have an assembly that it doesn't work like a city council, so it doesn't create its own policy or anything like that as it does in other cities, but our assembly is entirely there to hold the mayor to account. So we actually have a built-in mechanism. There's monthly committee meetings and everything, and what we call mayor's questions times. We're literally held to account on a monthly basis on all of our strategies, and we do, I believe it's an annual reporting on how we're doing. So we published our London Environment Strategy in 2018, and we publish an annual report against how we've delivered against that. But we also get asked all the time on a monthly basis, what are we doing? How many hectares of green space have we funded? How many developments have met our urban greening factor targets? How many, all those sorts of questions. So we have that built into our system, and we react to it too. So if we find that something's not working, we tweak policy. So it's not as though we do a strategy or policy and it's done, and then we don't touch it again for 5 years. We're always monitoring and always updating. But I know that's relatively unique.
Thank you. Anna from Belgrade, from Zeus. Abby mentioned the biodiversity net gain strategy, and I would like to ask David to briefly reflect on that, because to me it seems like a very actionable strategy, and maybe we can think of reducing the gap between strategy and action by producing very operational policies.
Biodiversity, shall I explain biodiversity net gain just very briefly? Right, okay. So biodiversity net gain is the basic principle of, if a development is going to happen, there needs to be a metric that ensures that there is more biodiversity value in the development after it's finished, on completion and for the next 30 years, than was there beforehand. It is a strategy and a policy built from practice, because through working with developers, we've proven that biodiversity can be recovered and nature can be recovered through the development process, through good quality master planning, engaging all professions and design teams throughout the process. And so we've proven over the years that it works, not just London, but not just the Wildlife Trust, lots of the NGOs working in partnership with local authorities and developers. It is, however, a policy and a strategy that is designed to slow down or prevent the development of rural England. It is designed to stop development on farmland because the way the metric has been designed, and this is why it's frozen, because there's a lot of lobbying against it from the development industry, the housing sector. It's been designed so that it is physically impossible to create a net gain. There's a minimum of 10% that needs to be 10% biodiversity brought back. So in certain parts of the country, particularly arable agricultural areas, you just can't build and bring back nature and recover nature. So the policy is designed to freeze development in those areas and encourage development in brownfield sites. It's exactly designed for densification of already dense urban communities. So this morning, it was supposed to be going into mandatory law. It is in law in the Environment Act, so it's gone through a whole rigorous bit of Parliament, and there's the secondary legislation that's required to be enacted in order for the biodiversity net gain to become mandatory. The target for mandatory net gain was November. It is the 27th of September, and there is no secondary legislation. 6 weeks we've got. So the government's held its hand up and said, we don't have secondary legislation. We don't know, other than the metric, yes, no, numbers on an Excel spreadsheet, there's no legislation or policy underneath it to create a market. So the other part of it is, if you can't build on that piece of land and create a net gain, you can purchase biodiversity net gain credits to offset, much like the carbon market, elsewhere. And the secondary legislation that was supposed to be coming into action was a framework through which that biodiversity net gain credit market was going to be constructed. There's no secondary legislation. It's like the Wild West. Everyone's making up their own markets and trading independently, and the government realised that that's a hot mess. So they've kind of paused it. I'd like to think that's why they've paused it, because it's not ready yet. We want to properly create a market so it works really functionally. It's not. This particular government has paused it, so it's going to kill it. It will kill it by Christmas. Biodiversity net gain will be run into the long grass, and it will be the next government's decision when to re-enliven it or not. But biodiversity net gain is just on a long list of culture war issues right now. I can go into a whole load more. Is that enough? Was that helpful? Yes. Too much.
A little bit more depressing than you thought it would be. Well,
the good news, though, the good news is, so the biodiversity net gain requirement has been in the works for a very long time, and that goes to David's point about how long policy takes. But because of that, we've all been preparing for it for some time now. And so actually, when we updated our London plan in 2021, we actually embedded it into that already. So we don't have quite the level of authority to enforce it as we would if it actually became nationally required. But we at least have a requirement in place and are starting to get kind of developers doing the calculations and submitting that kind of thing. But to be honest, it's not going to be a massive help for London anyway, because the urban area, 10% on almost nothing is almost nothing, so it's not necessarily a massively, it's not a game-changing policy for urban
cities.
Areas.
Yeah.
I saw one more. Nope, there's another one.
That's right. Yeah, I've got the microphone. I'm Kate from Peabody in London. When we did that vote at the beginning, I voted action. And it's not because I'm anti-strategy, but we've talked a lot about pace here. And I was curious, like, what does good strategy look like, and what does pacey strategy look like?
Good strategy is dynamic and adaptable. So, because really what you're trying to do with strategy is set a direction and priorities for what you care about, really. And our London plan is like 300 something pages. Our London, so you have to go into loads of detail to actually kind of set the evidence out for why and how and everything. But really, the principles of what's important and what we're aiming for are the key things. And one of the things that we are starting to do more in London and about to shift more into as well is our spatial strategies and really keeping our data and evidence up to date and continuously updated. So even as our written policies get slightly outdated after 6 years, we have a spatial strategy that is still dynamic, and you can still identify, well, that this area prioritizing you need to prioritize flood risk and things like that. So, but it means you have to also have people dedicated to doing that, and that's a challenge.
The gentleman here, and then Alice, and then a lady back there.
Hi, my name is Harj. I'm from Groundwork in London. My question is really about, given that a lot of greening projects are, the benefits will be seen years down the line, it's almost like a future-proofing. And given that practice and action can continue regardless of political environments, is there any future-proofing of strategy and policy to prevent it being stopped or being cancelled when there's a change of government? If I was being really skeptical, I could say that sometimes policies are discarded because of who started them rather than whether they're good or not.
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially because nationally that's probably what's going to happen. I mean, we are probably looking at a change in government nationally, and early signals from Labour suggest they might just scrap things just to start fresh. So that is a good point. I'm not going to argue for national policy. I'll just stick at municipal level. It's true. So we have an election coming up in May, a mayoral election, and I think and if we have a new mayor, they are required to do a new set of strategies and plans. So in a sense, you do get that happening. But for us, and maybe the case for others who are the officers of the municipality, you are still operating under certain principles and goals. And so, I mean, of course, there's a risk. You'll get someone quite radical who doesn't believe in climate change and things like that. That is a risk. But in most cases, when it comes to nature-based solutions, I feel is that actually politicians on every side care about greening in some sense. It's just about what they call it or which things they emphasize. And so in a sense, you still have the bones of the relationships, the kind of needs mapping, and all of that can still be used. It's just you might then pivot your attention to prioritizing, farmland over woodlands or something. That's usually what changes. And so you could still operate in that way.
Great question, thank you. Alice?
Hi, I'm Alice from the city of Munich. I think this strategy is super important in combination with actions, and I also sort of see it from an urban aspect. What I'm really struggling with to a certain extent is the legal aspect. Sort of you kind of know you have a vision, what you want to do, and then you have an idea what you want to do on the ground, and you get into the nitty-gritty things, and then fire protection comes, and then legal requirements about traffic and space you need and parking spots, you name it. How do you, in your daily life, particularly with this idea of rewilding also, which I think it's sort of nature-based solutions advanced to a certain extent, how do you deal with that in your everyday working planning context?
So London Wildlife Trust has a design consultancy. So we try and get ourselves embedded into design teams with this concept of strategic ecology. And strategic ecology is basically advocating for, and I know the irony there, Abby, but bear with me. Influencing, so I use the word strategic in a sort of influencing kind of way. We try and encourage and advocate for specialists who are completely outside, ecology is completely outside of their frame of reference. So like a mechanical engineer or the highways guy, the transport guy. We always go straight for the transport guy in a design team. It's always a guy. He's always been around forever. He always wears a kind of weird tie. And you just go straight for him. And you talk to him about how he can, through his work, through his street design, his curb design, bring ecology back into his work. And so you kind of inspire him to think about ecology in this completely different way. And then he becomes a kind of mini ecologist in his own right. And he comes into the design team thinking like an ecologist. And we do the same with all of these different specifics, specialisms. And so when it comes to, and then we also engage with local communities to empower them to understand what different techniques are in all of these different design teams. And then when everyone comes together in the co-creation workshops that we also, fully participate in and help lead, everyone sort of understands where we're coming from because we've done all the donkey work beforehand and individual conversations. So everyone feels empowered to be their own agent of ecological enhancement in their little piece of their world. And when you put all the pieces together, you've got yourself a team who are all agreeing with each other and all designing this ecologically rich landscape on curbsides, in tree pits, in the way that, you know, we've taken out roads and built whole road networks in development. Recently in Southall, this huge 88-acre site, and something like 30% of the road networks come out. Not because of, you know, us demanding it, but because the transport guy was like, let's just take out the roads. There's an idea. And that kind of, because it was inspired by working with us and looking at other sites. So small incremental changes with professions that don't think that they're ecologists or think that it's anything to do with them.
Yeah, that is so common. It's always highways teams that create the problems, I think. So
they're the solutions.
Yeah, they are. And I think so. One of the examples I'll give. So the Transport for London is the Transit Authority for London. It's under the mayor, but technically a separate organisation from the Greater London Authority, we work with strategic colleagues there to set biodiversity and green infrastructure targets, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to actual, like, the operations team, it's a complete struggle. It's the same thing. You know, they're always worried about cost and health and safety and maintenance, and really can't think outside the box if it's not already on the kind of design sheet. Can't think about it. It's too hard. It'll delay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All excuses they come up with. And so we had several instances of kind of this one-to-one project level agony of bringing people along, and, you know, eventually bringing people along and getting some projects through. But we were realizing, to move at any pace, we can't do this on an individual project basis. We have to do this at a bigger level. And so what we've started to do is actually come in and demand more from TfL at the strategic level. And, like, here's some targets for how many sustainable drainage systems you have to get in. And you need to show progress on a monthly basis, how you're working towards that, and what are the blockers? Oh, the blockers are the operations team, et cetera. And so that was how we were having many, many conversations. Our deputy mayor, and in some cases our mayor, would meet with their leader to push them on these questions. And I think that's what we're able to do, is set that bigger picture and those targets to really make them accountable, to move faster to win over those individual projects, because otherwise it was going to take forever to get all this through. So you kind of learn where the problems are, and you see how to win them over at a project scale, but then you move faster.
Can I just, it relates to an answer to what does good strategy and good policy making look like, and fast policy making. I think the GLA do really well with this. They listen, they communicate, they bring people like us in. Every level, they really engage and try and get people, as many people trying to influence those operational people as possible. They're open to that, and that's what good policy and good strategy making is.
Sounds like they're taking a lot of action on the way, right?
They are, they really are.
Okay, one question in the back there. It's been... Okay. Yeah, of course.
The idea of you trying to balance, like, with the blockers of health and safety, for example. Like, how do you choose one policy area over another? Like, what makes a SUDS structure more important than fire? I don't know.
That's a very live conversation in London right now. But well, the thing is, they don't have to be in conflict. Good design, you can manage health and safety, you can manage fire risk with good design, but you need to know that up front. And I was just in a workshop with the folks, the kind of professional development group for highways authorities and transport professionals, because my group, which was trying to promote sustainable drainage systems, was trying to encourage more in those sectors. And, you know, a lot of it is just not knowing that you can do these things safely, or you can do it. So more guidance and things, but also some people just don't know what it is and are afraid of change. So there's a bit of a culture change as well. And so a big part of it is identifying what those barriers and blockers are to making it happen, and then trying to tackle it at the whole level. So yeah, so we're coming out of that with there's going to be new guidance, there's going to be new professional development credit courses developed and things like that. So try to tackle it at the root of where the blocker is.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, great question. Any others? Questions, comments? Helen.
I was just wondering, you were talking about the people on the ground, sort of like the transport guys, the infrastructure guys, and I was just wondering, because you're sitting up there sort of making the strategies and the policies, and then they've got to be on the ground trying to interpret them and understanding, and I think one of the reasons so many people are often negative about strategies, policies, is because there are just new ones all the time, and they just get dumped on them, and they've got no understanding as to why. They've suddenly got to start thinking about these things. And I'm thinking it's great that you're bringing in the Wildlife Trust, but is it more than just individual sessions? I mean, do you actually organize training courses to just explain, not just like you are going to do this, this is how you're going to do it, but why you're doing this? Because we've found when we've held courses, not for nature-based solutions, but for with cooks in schools and preschools, it was explained to them why we wanted them to start changing the way they were cooking and what they were using. That's when they understood and started making changes, not just instructing them to, you have to do this. Have you found that in London?
Yeah. So we've created this kind of I don't know what you call it really, but it's like a design training, almost mini organization called Urban Design London, where we just basically take various policies and do like formal training courses that anybody, mainly focus at our local borough, any sort of staff from local boroughs can come to and learn more about it. And then we get experts from the field. So it's not just like us sitting there, but it's practitioners, it's experts in the field who actually run the sessions and inform people. So that's like a very formal way that we do it. We probably could stand to do it more and like refresh the curriculum more frequently. But yeah, no, I think that's really true, is if people understand why. And it's even more complex in London because we've got our policies and strategies, but then every borough has to do their own policies and strategies as well. And the cycles with which everyone updates these things are not the same. So you're always working with like a half updated strategy, and it is very confusing. So yeah, the more we can do to explain that and provide a place for people to come to rationalize it and understand it is better. And so we do try to do it. We probably could do it more, I think.
Good. I don't see any more questions or comments. Then I would say let's start to wrap up. And we actually had planned to just vote again, but I would like to go off script a bit. And I won't just not give you back the microphone, so you cannot interject. So the people that have their phone out already, could you set a timer for 1 minute? And then let's hear some like final remarks from each. You can stretch a little bit and warm yourself up and like think about some good punchlines. But 1 minute should be good, and then let's take the vote. Anyone got the timer ready? All right. Thanks, Nicola. Who wants to start?
We're doing it in the form of rap this time. I mean, I started before.
Oh, okay, fine.
It would be
fair.
Okay, are we ready, Nicola?
1 minute.
Ready, set, go.
Well, policy and strategy is really important, but I think how we define it doesn't have to be some massive long document that takes 6 years to do. I mean, it does legally, but really what we're talking about is setting the principles. Where are we trying to go? What are we trying to do? What do we care about? What are we prioritizing our time and our energy, our staff people, our money on? And you can see from the way David mentioned their corporate policies and their priorities in reaching underserved communities and not getting money from oil and things like that. Those are strategies and policies, and I think we need to have those to guide what we're doing. Otherwise, we're just, we can do really fantastic projects, we can take really great action, but we're doing it in a kind of a reactive, responsive way to whatever's in front of us or whatever's the easiest and fastest to do. And in some cases, that creates brilliant examples that lead the way, but it doesn't necessarily mainstream it. There we go.
All right, that was on the dot. Awesome. Thanks, Abby. All right, are you ready for the second round?
Yeah. I'm in danger of repeating myself, but practice has been going for a hell of a long time, and policy has been following practice. That was the basic premise of my point, and I think I'm standing by that wholeheartedly. That being said, good policy engages with practice. It follows the community organizing spirit. It watches how good practice works, reacts, evolves, is flexible, and is quick. So I'm not completely anti-policy, but I'm telling you now, policy follows practice. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Okay, I think we're ready for the vote. What do you think? We had a little bit of turnover, it looks like, but we'll just count it as it is and see what we come up with. All right. Do you want to do the
It's the same question. I mean, have we changed your mind? Do you think that energy time should be put towards good, long-term strategy development? Or you're so cute.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
All right, keep it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
Oh wait, there's one here.
Well, that's a half hand. It keeps coming and then going.
Way up, like this.
Be proud of your
1,
decision.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I count only 9. Yeah?
Oh.
Okay. That's 9.
Okay. And then, who thinks we just still need to go and do based on what we know now? Oh, okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That was a tough one.
Do you know
Thanks so much.
What was the score at the beginning? I don't think we changed anyone's minds.
No, well, you did.
They're both lower.
They are both lower.
We're both lower.
We basically
So we're crap.
unconvinced everybody. Wait, you didn't ask the don't know one, so that's gone up now.
So strategy lost 1 vote, and action lost 2 votes. So
So
you
Abby,
can
you won.
decide, but action has more votes.
Overall.
It's still.
But it lost
majority.
more votes.
Those might have just gone.
Well, it all just says, obviously, we took extreme positions, but you have to do both. And you have to do both as fast as possible. But more fun if we were more extreme.
All right, that is it for the session today. Thanks so much for playing with us. This was awesome. And it was funny to see you two sometimes okay, I gotta, argue for this, even though I have a different opinion. But often when we had this, actually, I don't know if you remember, Martin, we had this at a session in Davos where we had to debate each other. And when you actually take a stand that you don't usually do, it really is eye-opening sometimes. Going through that process of really putting yourself into a new perspective. So thanks so much for doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
For battling each other, even though you're friends and colleagues, that was awesome. And thanks for all the good questions. And happy to see you around here. All right, thanks all.